Welcome to our Halloween special, where we'll be discussing Edgar Allan Poe's groundbreaking work, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. In this video, we'll explore the inspirations behind this pioneering piece of literature, delve into Poe's unique writing methods, and take a look at his life during the creation of this story. We'll also read an abridged version of the tale, immersing ourselves in the chilling narrative that has captivated readers for nearly 2 centuries. Finally, we'll discuss the initial reception of the story and its enduring cultural impact, tracing its influence on the detective genre right up to the present day. So sit back, relax, and join us on this literary journey. Before we go forward, please give the video a like and hit the subscribe button. That really helps the channel out. Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue, published in 1841, is often described as the first modern detective story. The inspiration for this pioneering piece of literature came from various sources, reflecting Poe's diverse interests and experiences. One of the key inspirations was Poe's fascination with mind games, puzzles, and secret codes, known as cryptographs. This interest is evident in the analytical reasoning employed by the story's protagonist, C. Auguste Dupin, a character who would later influence the creation of other famous literary detectives like Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot. Poe's time living in Philadelphia also inspired the urban setting of the story. The city's atmosphere and architecture influenced Poe's depiction of Paris, where the story is set. This urban theme is a recurring element in Poe's fiction. At the time of writing The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Poe was known for his unsettled career in magazine editing and writing. Over a span of 10 years, he edited several literary journals, including Burton's Gentleman's Magazine and Graham's Magazine in Philadelphia, and the Broadway Journal in New York City. Despite his significant contributions to these publications, his career was marked by instability. This was largely due to his personal struggles, particularly his issues with alcohol. Poe's problems with alcohol began in college and escalated over time. His drinking habits were so severe that they cost him his job as a magazine editor in 1837. His excessive drinking took an ever-increasing toll after his mid-20s, and it was a problem he battled throughout his life. In addition to his struggles with alcohol, Poe was known for having frequent quarrels with his employers. These disputes were likely exacerbated by his personal issues and the stress of his financial situation. Despite his talent and creativity, the harsh conditions of the literary marketplace made it impossible for Poe to make a decent living through writing. It is important to note that the early 19th century saw a surge of interest in crime stories and sensational news, which likely contributed to Poe's decision to write a detective story. With all that being said, and without further ado, here is The Murders in the Rue Morgue. Before we begin, I do want to specify that what I will be reading is a highly condensed, abridged version of the story. This is because I don't think anyone wants to hear me reading the full 26-page version, but if you would like to read the story yourself, I have a link to it in the description. Chapter 1. It was summer in Paris, 1840. That's when I met Auguste Dupin for the first time. He was a peculiar man, part of a once famous family that used to have a lot of money. But Dupin wasn't rich himself. Money didn't bother him much. He had enough for basics and a few books, and that's all he cared about. Books made him happy. We first crossed paths while both hunting for a rare book in an old bookstore. Later, we bumped into each other again in another shop. Eventually, we got to talking. I was fascinated by his family's history and impressed by how much he'd read. But what really struck me was his sharp mind, like a beacon of light in my life. I sensed that having a friend like him was priceless. So I told him how I felt, and he agreed to move in with me. I figured he'd enjoy my collection of great books, and I'd enjoy having some company since I wasn't too keen on being alone. We spent our days reading, writing, and chatting, but Dupin was a night owl. We'd often roam the streets of Paris after dark, guided only by the stars. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just walked in silence, lost in our thoughts. One night, as we strolled along a long, dirty Parisian street, both lost in our own worlds, Dupin suddenly spoke up. "You're right. He's quite small, and he'd do better in lighter, less serious plays." "Yeah, absolutely," I replied. At first, I didn't find anything strange about it. Dupin agreed with my thoughts. That seemed perfectly normal to me. But then, I realized that Dupin had agreed with something I hadn't even said. I stopped in my tracks, trying to test him, to see if he really could read my unspoken thoughts. How did I know you were thinking of Chantilly? Why do you stop? You were thinking that Chantilly is too small for the plays in which he acts, Dupin explained. That's exactly what I was thinking. But tell me, how on earth did you know when I hadn't said a word? He went on to describe how he pieced together my thoughts, starting from a run-in with a fruit seller to the actor Chantilly. It was like he had a window into my mind, seeing my thoughts unfold. It was uncanny and astonishing. But little did I know, Dupin's remarkable deductive abilities were about to be put to the test in a much more serious matter. Chapter 2. In the summer of 1840, I met a man named Auguste Dupin in Paris. He was a really intriguing young man with a sharp, active mind. It felt like he could look straight through a person, right into their soul, and uncover their deepest thoughts. Sometimes he seemed like two people in one who calmly pieced things together, and another who coolly took them apart. One morning, during that hot summer, Dupin showed me once again his unique ability to reason. We read in the newspaper about a horrifying murder. An elderly woman and her daughter, living alone in a house on Rue Morgue, had been brutally killed in the dead of night. The article described how the whole neighborhood was woken up by screams of terror coming from the house. When people rushed in, they found a horrifying scene. The room was in total chaos, furniture broken and blood everywhere. The daughter's body was found in a gruesome position above the fireplace, while the old woman's head had been nearly severed. The next day, the newspaper interviewed people who knew the victims. They all said the same thing. The two women kept to themselves, rarely seen by anyone. The daughter's body was found with marks showing she was strangled by powerful hands. As I finished reading this chilling account with Dupin, his eyes took on that distant, calculating look. When he asked for my thoughts, I admitted it was a perplexing mystery, one that seemed almost impossible to solve. But Dupin disagreed. No, I think you're mistaken. It is a mystery, yes, but there must be an answer. Let's go to the house and see for ourselves. There has to be an answer. There has to be. Chapter 3. One hot summer morning, Dupin and I read about a terrible murder in the newspapers. An old woman and her daughter who lived alone were killed in their house on the Rue Morgue. The daughter was strangled, and her mother's head was nearly cut off. The weapon was found in the room. Neighbors rushed to the house when they heard screams, but when they got there, they found no living person inside. The windows were locked from the inside, and there was no way for the killer to escape. I thought it was an unsolvable mystery, but Dupin disagreed. He believed there had to be an answer and suggested we go to the house to investigate. We arrived at the Rue Morgue house in the late afternoon. There was a crowd gathered outside. Before entering, Dupin carefully examined the neighboring houses, which struck me as unusual. Inside, we went to the room where the bodies were found. Everything was just as the police had left it. Dupin examined the scene closely. Then we left. The next morning, Dupin came to me with a revelation. He believed the key to the mystery lay in the strange voices heard during the incident. The low voice was identified as French, but the high voice baffled everyone, as each person described it differently. Dupin found it odd that people from different countries thought it sounded foreign. He pointed out that not one person understood the words. This led him to a significant realization about the case. He emphasized that he had found what he was looking for in the house on the Rue Morgue, but he didn't reveal the answer just yet. He wanted me to keep in mind the importance of the voices in solving the mystery. Chapter 4. Murderers had invaded the old house on the Rue Morgue. They left behind the lifeless bodies of an elderly woman and her daughter. The daughter's body was found on the fourth-floor bedroom. The mother lay outside, behind the house, her head nearly severed. Oddly, the knife used was discovered inside the room. The door and windows were tightly shut and locked from the inside, leaving no apparent way for the culprits to escape. Strange voices were heard, one speaking in French and the other incomprehensible. Yet when the police arrived, the room was empty. Dupin and I had learned this from the newspapers and visited the crime scene ourselves. Now Dupin was explaining his discoveries to me. Remember this much. It was enough for me to know what to focus on when we were at that house, and I found it. He began pondering on how the murderers might have escaped. They couldn't have vanished through the walls, so they must have used one of the windows. However, they were both securely fastened. Dupin noticed an unusual detail. The windows were nailed shut. He deduced that the nails weren't what held the windows closed. There had to be a hidden lock. Dupin demonstrated by opening one of the windows with a concealed button. He reinserted the nail, and it still kept the window secure. He repeated this process with the other window, proving that the killer could indeed have left through it. The nailheads looked undisturbed, giving the illusion that they were still in place. Dupin's keen observation revealed that what seemed impossible was, in fact, possible. The murderer had escaped through the window. Dupin's reasoning led him to reconstruct the events in his mind. On a warm summer night, the killer found the window open. They entered and exited, closing the window behind them. The special lock inside ensured it stayed closed. The nail only appeared to be holding it shut. Dupin spoke not to me, but to his own thoughts. His eyes were focused inward, driven by his unique ability to unravel the truth. He looked at me with a sharp intensity, showing that solving these gruesome murders brought him great satisfaction. I questioned how the murderer could descend from the fourth-floor window to the ground. Dupin addressed this, mentioning a lightning rod running down the building. It provided a potential route for someone to scale the wall and access the window. It required immense strength and specialized training, narrowing down the type of person the murderer might be. Now the question remained. Who was the killer? Chapter 5. That peculiar Frenchman, Auguste Dupin, continued to share his insights on the Rue Morgue case. We now understood that the murderer could have entered and exited through a window, leaving them both securely shut from inside. Dupin was convinced that only someone with extraordinary strength and training could have climbed the lightning rod on the side of the house to reach the window. However, we still didn't know the identity of the killer. Dupin suggested we revisit the fourth-floor room in our minds. He pointed out that although there were clothes scattered about, none appeared to be missing. The victims seldom left the house, so they had no great need for many clothes. The ones found in the room were suitable. If the killer took some, why not take the best or take them all? Furthermore, why leave behind all the money? He urged me to discard the idea that the motive was money, as the gold was found at the scene. Dupin believed there might be no real motive except perhaps fear. We then analyzed the murders themselves. The manner in which the girl was killed and her body placed above the fireplace was highly unusual. The level of strength required to perform such acts was immense. The presence of thick gray hair pulled from the old woman's head indicated this tremendous force. Moreover, the old lady's head had been almost completely severed, an excessively brutal act. Adding to this, the room was in a state of chaos. Considering these factors, we were faced with a series of terrifying and inhuman actions, along with an incomprehensible voice. Dupin asked me what conclusions I had reached. As Dupin posed the question, a shiver ran down my spine. I suggested a madman, someone who had lost their mind, might be responsible. Dupin disagreed, explaining that madmen, though they may be from different countries, use recognizable words. The killer, on the other hand, left no comprehensible words behind. He then drew my attention to a piece of hair, which he believed was not human. I realized Dupin was correct. The marks on the daughter's neck were far too large to be made by a human hand. They resembled the handprint of an orangutan, a man-like animal known for its strength and wildness. Dupin provided evidence from a book by Cuvier to support his theory. He deduced that the murders were committed by an orangutan, possibly one that had escaped from its owner. This led Dupin to believe that a Frenchman knew of the killings, and he placed an ad in the newspaper to draw the owner's attention. If the owner was a sailor, as Dupin suspected, he might attempt to retrieve the valuable animal discreetly. Just as Dupin finished speaking, we heard footsteps on the stairs. A visitor had entered, a sailor who Dupin welcomed warmly. The case was taking a surprising turn. Chapter 6. My friend Dupin was now sure that the murders in the Rue Morgue were committed by a wild jungle animal known as an orangutan. He believed it had escaped from its owner, who was likely a sailor. Dupin had placed an ad in the newspaper, inviting the owner to retrieve the animal from our house. As the owner arrived, we couldn't help but wonder if he was indeed a sailor. Sure enough, the man who walked in was a sailor. He was a large, sturdy man, carrying a hefty piece of wood but no gun. Speaking in French, he greeted us politely. Dupin engaged him in conversation, inquiring about the orangutan's age. The sailor explained that the animal couldn't be more than 4 or 5 years old. He expressed interest in having it back, and even offered to compensate Dupin for his trouble. Dupin, however, had a different idea. He proposed that the sailor share everything he knew about the Rue Morgue murders in exchange. Dupin calmly walked to the door, locked it, and placed the key in his coat. He also took a gun from his coat and set it on the table. This visibly rattled the sailor. He tried to reach for his piece of wood, but then sank back into his chair, trembling and turning pale. He didn't utter a word, and his eyes were shut tight. Dupin reassured him, explaining that we had no intention of harming him. He knew the sailor wasn't the killer, but he had vital information. Dupin urged him to share the truth, emphasizing that it was a matter of honor. The sailor hesitated but eventually confessed. He recounted how he had captured the orangutan on a trip to Borneo, and how the animal had caused him trouble after his friend's death. Eventually, he brought the creature to Paris, keeping it hidden in his house. On the night of the murders, he returned home to find the orangutan holding a knife. Terrified, he followed as it escaped, but was unable to catch it. The orangutan made its way to the Rue Morgue, where it entered a room through an open window. There, it encountered the 2 women. The older woman noticed the animal, and chaos ensued. The orangutan, frightened, pulled out a clump of hair and tragically killed both women. In a frenzy, the orangutan wreaked havoc in the room, ultimately placing the daughter's body above the fireplace and throwing the old woman out of the window. The sailor watched in horror, unable to move. When the animal turned towards him, he finally found the strength to flee. The police chief was displeased that the solution came from someone outside the force. He believed people should stick to their own business. Dupin, however, disagreed. He acknowledged the sailor's skill in explaining complex matters, even if they seemed far-fetched. He concluded that sometimes people dismiss what's right in front of them, claiming it's impossible. The end. Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue was first published in Graham's magazine in April 1841. Poe referred to it as one of his Tales of Ratiocination, a series of stories that feature the character C. Auguste Dupin, a man from Paris who solves mysteries through logical reasoning. The reception of The Murders in the Rue Morgue was mixed. While it was recognized for its innovation and the introduction of the detective genre, it also faced some criticism. According to the book Universal Horrors, the critical reception upon its release was harsh. However, over time, the story has gained recognition for its significant contribution to literature. The choice of an orangutan as the murderer was inspired by a real-life event. In July 1839, an orangutan was displayed at the Masonic Hall in Philadelphia. The public reaction to this display caught Poe's attention and provided a unique twist for his story. The cultural significance of The Murders in the Rue Morgue is profound. It introduced a new genre of short fiction to American literature, the detective story. Many later characters followed Poe's model of the brilliant detective, his personal friend who serves as narrator, and the final revelation being presented before the reasoning that leads up to it. Furthermore, The Murders in the Rue Morgue continues an urban theme that was used several times in Poe's fiction, likely inspired by Poe's time living in Philadelphia. The tale has an underlying metaphor for the battle of brains versus brawn. Have you read The Murders in the Rue Morgue? What do you think of Poe's writing? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you have to say. Till next time, signing off. This has been Christina.